Welcome to Café Tales. I'm Alie, your host for today's mystery. We're joining the legendary Belgian detective Hercule Poirot and his faithful chronicler Captain Hastings. Today, this tale of retribution will transport you to the hallowed halls of St. Cecilia's finishing school for girls, where the headmistress's murder unravels a web of deception stretching back 15 years. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from today? Let me know in the comments. Now, settle in with a cup of hot chocolate and allow the little gray cells to work as we embark on a journey through the shadows of the past. A summons to St. Cecilia's, Hercule Poirot and the Murder at St. Cecilia's, Chapter 1, A Summons. To St. Cecilia's, it was on a particularly dreary Tuesday in April that I found Hercule Poirot contemplating a letter with unusual intensity. Outside, London wore its customary veil of fog, and my friend's apartment at Whitehaven Mansion seemed a sanctuary of warmth and order against the dismal weather. "Ah, Hastings! You arrive most opportunely," Poirot declared, looking up from his correspondence. His eyes twinkled with that familiar spark, one I had come to recognize as the harbinger of an interesting case. "Good morning, Poirot. You seem rather absorbed in your mail today," I remarked, accepting the cup of hot chocolate his efficient secretary, Miss Lemon, had prepared. "Indeed, mon ami. It is a most intriguing communication from an old acquaintance, Lady Westholme. You remember her, perhaps, from the affair at Mesopotamia?" I confessed I did not. "No matter. She is now a benefactor of an educational establishment, St. Cecilia's Finishing School for Girls, a most respectable institution. Young ladies of good family are taught deportment, languages, music, all the accomplishments necessary for society." "And there's been a crime?" I asked, settling into my chair. No, Hastings. Always you leap to conclusions." He tapped the letter with one perfectly manicured finger. "Lady Westholme expresses, how shall I say, concerns. Vague, yet persistent, about the school's new music teacher and the headmistress's recent behavior. Most curious. Hardly sounds like a case for Hercule Poirot," I observed. "Ah, but there is something here, Hastings. The little hints between the lines. Lady Westholme writes with precision. She is not a woman given to fancies. When she says the headmistress has become uncharacteristically distracted and secretive since the arrival of Miss Blackwood, I perceive anxiety genuine enough to merit investigation." "Miss Blackwood being the music teacher, I presume?" "Precisely. So, Lady Westholme has arranged for me to give a lecture at the school on famous cases. A pretext, you understand, for my observations." "Will you go, then?" Poirot smoothed his magnificent mustache with meticulous care before responding. "The little gray cells. They are in need of exercise. And this St. Cecilia's. It intrigues me. A closed community, Hastings. Always they harbor the most fascinating secrets." 2 days later, we found ourselves on a train bound for the Sussex countryside. Poirot sat opposite me, immaculate as ever in his perfectly pressed suit, occasionally consulting a small notebook containing facts about the school that Miss Lemon had compiled. "Founded in 1887, he murmured. "Currently under the direction of Miss Arabella Thornfield, who has been headmistress for 17 years. Reputation? Excellent. Notable alumni include 2 duchesses and a cabinet minister's daughter." "Hardly sounds like a hotbed of intrigue," I remarked. "Ah, but appearances, Hastings. They are often deceiving, are they not? St. Cecilia's Finishing School. The school proved to be an imposing Victorian edifice set amid carefully tended gardens. Gothic spires reached toward the sky, and ivy clung tenaciously to the red brick walls. We were met at the entrance by a severe-looking woman who introduced Herself as Mrs. Danvers, the school secretary. "Lady Westholme telephoned to say you'd been delayed, Monsieur Poirot," she said, consulting her wristwatch. "Miss Thornfield is conducting afternoon prayers in the chapel, but will receive you afterward." She led us through hushed corridors where our footsteps echoed on polished floors. Uniformed girls passed in orderly lines, casting curious glances at Poirot's distinctive figure. I noticed that several members of staff regarded us with barely concealed interest. "That is Miss Blackwood," Poirot whispered as a slender young woman in a modest gray dress crossed the main hall. She carried a stack of sheet music and walked with her eyes downcast, as though reluctant to engage with her surroundings. I observed nothing particularly remarkable about her. She appeared quiet, perhaps a little plain, with her dark hair drawn back severely from her face. Yet Poirot watched her with that peculiar intensity that I knew meant his formidable powers of observation were engaged. Our tour continued through a hall lined with photographs. "Our Hall of Honor," Mrs. Danvers explained, "featuring distinguished alumni, former headmistresses, and notable achievements." It was here that a curious incident occurred. Miss Blackwood had emerged from a side room and was crossing behind us when she suddenly halted before one of the photographs. I might not have noticed had Poirot not stiffened beside me. Her face for an instant transformed, a flash of such raw emotion that I was startled by its intensity. Pain, recognition. Then, just as quickly, her composed mask returned, and she continued on her way. "Most interesting," murmured Poirot. The headmistress's parlor. Mrs. Danvers showed us to the visitors' parlor, where we were served tea while awaiting the headmistress. Poirot sipped his beverage with characteristic precision. "Tell me, Mrs. Danvers," he inquired casually, "how long has Miss Blackwood been at St. Cecilia's?" "Only this term, Monsieur Poirot. She came with excellent references from a school in Switzerland." "Switzerland, a most beautiful country, and—" "Miss Thornfield, she is satisfied with the new appointment?" Something flickered in the secretary's eyes. "Miss Thornfield makes all staff decisions with the utmost care. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must return to my duties. Miss Thornfield will join you shortly." Left alone, Poirot rose and examined the room with methodical attention. "A school with traditions, Hastings," he observed, indicating the photographs and trophies. "History is revered here." Before I could respond, the parlor door opened to admit a tall, imposing woman in her 50s. She had iron gray hair, arranged in a severe style, and piercing blue eyes that assessed us with cool authority. "Monsieur Poirot, I am Arabella Thornfield. Lady Westholme speaks highly of your lecture series. We are honored to welcome you to St. Cecilia's." A terrifying discovery. Their conversation was interrupted by a sound that seemed to freeze the very air in the room, a high, terrified scream echoing through the corridors. Miss Thornfield's face drained of color as she rose abruptly. "The chapel," she whispered. We followed her running figure through the corridors to the school's chapel, where a crowd was already gathering. A young student stood trembling at the entrance, her face ashen. Inside, slumped over the organ, lay Miss Thornfield's imposing figure, utterly still. Pinned to her chest was a piece of paper bearing what appeared to be a Bible verse. "The sins of the father shall be visited upon the children." The stern, formidable headmistress of St. Cecilia's finishing school for girls would never rise again. Chapter 2. The Order of Things. The chapel had transformed from a place of quiet devotion to the center of a murder investigation with alarming swiftness. Girls were ushered away by ashen-faced teachers while Poirot knelt beside the body, his eyes narrowed in concentration. "Do not touch anything, if you please," he instructed a well-meaning matron who had stepped forward. The police must see everything exactly as it is found. I glanced again at the verse pinned to the headmistress's chest. A message of vengeance, would you say, Poirot? I asked quietly. My friend did not answer immediately. He was examining the position of the body with that peculiar intensity I knew so well. Miss Thornfield sat slumped over the organ keys, one hand fallen to her side, the other still resting on the ivory. Her austere features were contorted in what appeared to be surprise rather than pain. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured at last, indicating a delicate china teacup that had fallen to the floor beside the organ bench, its contents spilled across the polished wood. "You perceive the faint aroma?" I leaned closer. "Almonds." "Precisely. Bitter almonds. Most suggestive, is it not? And yet," he frowned slightly, his fingertips hovering above the spilled liquid without touching it. "The investigation begins." Our examination was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Japp from Scotland Yard, who had been summoned with remarkable speed. Well, Poirot. Lady Westholme telephoned me directly. Said you were already on the premises and might have insights. Convenient timing, what?" "Not for poor Miss Thornfield," Poirot replied solemnly. "You understand, my friend, I was here merely to give a lecture. This tragedy, it was not anticipated." Japp nodded briskly. "Right then. What have we got?" "Poisoning, almost certainly," Poirot replied. "The bitter almond scent suggests cyanide, though there are other substances that produce similar effects. I would advise a most thorough post-mortem examination." While the police photographer documented the scene, Poirot's attention was drawn to the sheet music arranged on the organ stand. "Interesting," he murmured. "The hymn is Abide With Me. You are familiar with it, Hastings?" I nodded. "Commonly sung at funerals." "Indeed. And yet, today was not a funeral service but routine afternoon prayers." He carefully examined the edges of the pages. "Observe how precisely they are aligned, most particular." The headmistress's study Japp had begun, questioning the staff and students. I overheard fragments of the initial interviews, shock, disbelief, and the repeated assertion that Miss Thornfield had no enemies. When at last we adjourned to the headmistress's study, Poirot insisted on examining the room before anything was disturbed. It was a handsome chamber, lined with books and dominated by a massive oak desk, upon which papers were arranged in meticulous order. "Miss Thornfield valued precision," Poirot observed, indicating the perfectly aligned stationery and carefully arranged pens. "Everything in its place." "That makes any disturbance all the more noticeable," I suggested. "Exactly so, mon ami," Japp joined us, notebook in hand. "The secretary, Mrs. Danvers, says Miss Thornfield was reviewing student files yesterday. Spent hours at it." "Current students?" I inquired. "That's the odd bit. According to Mrs. Danvers, she was going through records from 15 years ago. Can't imagine what she was looking for." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "The past, my friend, it does not always remain buried, no matter how deeply one tries to enter it." A torn photograph. We proceeded to interview the staff, beginning with Mrs. Danvers, whose efficiency seemed unshaken by the tragedy, though her eyes betrayed her distress. "Miss Thornfield took her tea in the chapel every afternoon before dinner," she explained. "It was her custom to play the organ for precisely 30 minutes, her private devotion." "And was there anything unusual about her behavior recently?" Poirot inquired. Mrs. Danvers hesitated. "She was preoccupied since the beginning of term." Since the arrival of Miss Blackwood, perhaps? Poirot suggested softly. A flash of something, recognition, apprehension, crossed the secretary's face. I couldn't say, Monsieur Poirot. Miss Thornfield did not confide her personal concerns to me. When Miss Blackwood herself was summoned, I observed her closely. She entered the room with quiet dignity, her face pale but composed. Only her hands, clasped tightly before her, betrayed any agitation. "This is a dreadful business, Miss Blackwood," Jap began. "I understand you're new to the school this term?" "Yes, Inspector. I arrived 6 weeks ago." "And your previous position?" "I taught music at the Institut Mont Blanc in Switzerland." Poirot, who had been examining a paperweight on the desk, looked up sharply. "Switzerland, a beautiful country. You are Swiss, perhaps?" "No, Monsieur Poirot, I am English, though I have spent many years abroad." "And your family?" A shadow crossed her features. "I have no family, sir. My mother died when I was quite young. I was raised by distant relatives. My condolences, mademoiselle. Tell me, had you and Miss Thornfield ever met before your appointment here?" "No, monsieur. My application was handled through correspondence, and my references from Switzerland secured the position." "You found her a satisfactory employer?" Miss Blackwood's gaze dropped to her hands. "She was demanding, but fair. I had no complaints." "And this afternoon, you were not in the chapel?" "No, Inspector. I was preparing for tomorrow's choral practice in the music room, which is in the East Wing." After she had been dismissed, Poirot turned to the desk once more, opening drawers with methodical precision. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of administrative papers, he discovered something that caused him to pause. "Ah," he said softly. "Regard, Hastings." It was a torn photograph, just half of what had once been a larger image. It showed a young girl, perhaps 16 or 17, with features that bore a striking resemblance to Miss Blackwood. On the back, written in a firm hand, were the words, "Case closed. God have mercy." Poirot and I exchanged glances. There was no need to articulate the question forming in both our minds. A mysterious appointment Jap, returning from interviewing a housemaid, noticed our discovery. "What's that you found, Poirot?" Before my friend could answer, a sharp rap came at the door. A constable entered, his expression urgent. "Inspector, sir, we found something in the victim's appointment book. She had scheduled a meeting for tomorrow with a Dr. Partridge from the Lausanne Sanitarium in Switzerland. We've telephoned his hotel. He arrived in England 3 days ago." Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar light, the one that told me his little gray cells were already connecting scattered threads into a pattern that, for now, only he could perceive. Chapter 3. The Discordant Note. I arrived at St. Cecilia's. The following morning, having received Poirot's telegram, requesting my presence with an urgency unusual even for him. The school wore an atmosphere of hushed tension. Groups of girls whispered in corners, while staff members moved through the corridors with unnatural briskness, as though activity might keep grief at bay. Poirot greeted me in the visitors' parlor, his eyes bright with that familiar gleam that told me his faculties were fully engaged. "Ah, Hastings, mon ami, you have come most promptly. It is good of you." "Not at all, Poirot. Your wire suggested the matter was urgent." "Indeed, indeed." He lowered his voice. "A most perplexing case, Hastings. The post-mortem confirms poison, not simple cyanide, as the almond scent suggested, but a complex compound. Most unusual. Any suspects yet?" "Suspects? Mais oui, but everyone is a suspect, mon ami. In a closed community such as this, secrets intertwine like the roots of ancient trees, hidden but connected beneath the surface. He tapped his forehead. The little gray cells, they work ceaselessly on the problem. He guided me through the main building, providing me with a summary of his findings thus far. We paused in a corridor lined with classrooms, from one of which emerged a group of solemn-faced girls. The students appear to be continuing with their lessons, I observed. The school governors insist upon maintaining routine. Children require structure, particularly in times of distress. Poirot's mustache twitched. But observe the young lady in the blue, her reaction to yesterday's events. The girl in question was taller than her companions, with a serious expression and spectacles that gave her a studious appearance. "What about her?" I asked. "She was singled out by Miss Thornfield during choir practice the day before the murder. A minor mistake in her singing, yet the headmistress's reprimand was, by all accounts, disproportionately severe. And this happened under the direction of Miss Blackwood?" "Précisément. The new music teacher observed the entire incident with what witnesses describe as unusual intensity. But come, let us speak with some of these young ladies." With permission from their mathematics teacher, we interviewed several students in an empty classroom. Most expressed shock and sadness at the headmistress's death, though few seemed genuinely grieved. Miss Thornfield, it appeared, had been respected, rather than loved. "She was very strict about everything," Catherine Hargreaves explained when questioned directly. "But fair, usually. Except lately, she seemed different." "Different in what way, mademoiselle?" Poirot inquired gently. The femme girl adjusted her spectacles, more distracted. "And sometimes she would stare at Miss Blackwood during morning assembly, like she was trying to remember something." Another student, a small mouse-like girl named Evelyn Porter, added, "Miss Blackwood is ever so nice, though. When Miss Thornfield scolded Catherine for missing that high note in Panis Angelicus, Miss Blackwood later told her that her voice was lovely and not to take it to heart." Poirot's eyes brightened with interest. "This incident, it occurred during choir practice. Oui? When precisely?" "Last Thursday afternoon," Catherine replied. "Miss Thornfield came in to observe our rehearsal for the Easter service. And her reaction to your mistake. It surprised you?" "It was just one note," the girl said, her expression troubled. "She'd never singled anyone out like that before. She said I should be ashamed, that my failure reflected poorly on the school's standards. It was humiliating." After concluding our interviews with the students, Poirot led me toward the administrative wing. "Jap has returned to London temporarily," he explained. "A development regarding the Swiss connection. It seems this Dr. Hartley from the Lausanne Sanitarium is not merely visiting England by coincidence." "Oh?" Miss Thornfield wrote to him specifically, requesting information about a former patient. "Most intriguing, is it not?" We passed the chapel, now sealed with police tape, and continued toward a separate building connected by a covered walkway. "The music wing," Poirot explained. "I wished to examine Miss Blackwood's domain." The music room was a large, airy space, dominated by a grand piano. Tall windows overlooked the garden, and framed portraits of composers adorned the walls. The room was empty when we entered, the piano lid closed. "She spends much time here," Poirot observed, moving about the room with careful attention. "Observe the orderly arrangement of the sheet music, the precisely positioned chair. Miss Blackwood values order, like her late employer." He examined the bookshelf containing musical scores and instructional texts. Among them, somewhat incongruously, stood several volumes on botany. An unusual interest for a music teacher, perhaps? I suggested. Peut-être, Poirot agreed, though many educated ladies cultivate diverse intellectual pursuits. He was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor. We turned to see Miss Blackwood herself enter, stopping short at the sight of us. "Forgive the intrusion, mademoiselle," Poirot said smoothly. "We are merely acquainting Captain Hastings with the school grounds." "I see." Her voice was soft but composed. "Please don't let me interrupt. I merely came to retrieve some music for this afternoon's lesson." She moved to the piano, unlocked a compartment beneath the keyboard, and withdrew several sheets of music. As she did so, her hand trembled slightly. "You will resume teaching so soon after this tragedy?" Poirot inquired. "Music can be a comfort in difficult times," she replied, placing the sheets into a leather portfolio. "If you'll excuse me." After she had gone, Poirot's gaze lingered on the piano. "Let us see what our new music teacher finds so calming, shall we?" He opened the lid and examined the sheet music left on the stand. Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor, a piece of great emotion. "Hastings," he murmured, seating himself at the piano. Poirot played a few notes with surprising dexterity. "I am no virtuoso, but I recognize this melody. It is familiar, yet—" His fingers continued to move over the keys, transitioning from Chopin's composition to a simpler, haunting tune. "What is that?" I asked. "A lullaby, Hastings. Very old. My mother sang it when I was a child." His expression grew thoughtful. "Come, there is more to investigate." Inspector Japp had returned by late afternoon, bringing with him a file of papers. "You were right about the Swiss connection, Poirot," he announced when we met in Miss Thornfield's office. "Lausanne Sanitarium is a private mental institution." According to Dr. Hartley, Miss Thornfield contacted him specifically about a former patient, a young woman committed there 15 years ago, a Catherine Sinclair. "And the reason for her commitment?" Poirot inquired. "Acute melancholia following her expulsion from—" Japp consulted his notes. "St. Cecilia's finishing school for girls." Later that evening, while exploring the chapel at Poirot's insistence, we made a discovery that caused my friend's eyes to gleam with excitement. Behind a panel in the organ, concealed from casual inspection, lay a collection of newspaper clippings. They detailed a scandal from 15 years prior, allegations of theft against a student named Catherine Sinclair, leading to her expulsion and subsequent breakdown. "The past returns to haunt the present," Poirot murmured, examining the yellowed clippings. "But who placed these here, mon ami? And why now?" The question hung in the air between us, unanswered. Chapter 4. Shadows of the past. The following morning broke with a fine drizzle that settled over St. Cecilia's like a veil. Poirot and I departed early, motoring along the winding coastal road toward a small village some 20 miles distant. My friend had been unusually reticent about our destination, but the telegram he had dispatched the previous evening had mentioned an urgent appointment. "You see, Hastings," he explained as our motor car navigated the narrow lanes, "in matters such as these, one must go back to the source. This scandal involving Catherine Sinclair, it did not begin yesterday, nor even last week. Its roots stretch back many years. 15, according to those newspaper clippings," I observed. "Précisément. And when Miss Thornfield was confronted with a ghost from the past—" "You believe Miss Blackwood is connected to this Sinclair girl?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "The little gray cells, they work always. But we must not leap to conclusions without evidence, n'est-ce pas? Our destination proved to be a modest stone cottage overlooking the sea. A neat garden, somewhat neglected but still showing signs of careful planning, surrounded the dwelling. Poirot consulted a slip of paper in his pocket before approaching the door. Miss Amelia Walters, he explained. Former deputy headmistress of St. Cecilia's, retired these past 8 years. If anyone knows the truth about the Sinclair affair, it is she. The door was opened by a tall, angular woman with silver hair arranged in a simple knot. Despite her advanced years, she must have been well into her 70s. Her back was straight, her gaze direct. Monsieur Poirot? She inquired, her voice carrying the crispness of one accustomed to command. Lady Westholme telephoned. You'd better come in. We were shown into a small sitting room where every surface was adorned with photographs. I noticed immediately that many featured the imposing facade of St. Cecilia's. 35 years I gave to that institution, Miss Walters remarked, following my gaze. Deputy headmistress for the last 20. One does not easily sever such ties. Your dedication does you credit, mademoiselle, Poirot replied, particularly in times of difficulty. You mean the Sinclair business? It was not a question. Miss Walters seated herself in a worn armchair, her hands folded in her lap. I wondered if that might resurface someday. And now Arabella is dead. Murdered, Poirot corrected gently. Yes. The old lady's eyes clouded. Lady Westholme telephoned with the news. Dreadful business. Poisoned, she said. Indeed. And we have reason to believe the murder may be connected to events from 15 years ago. The expulsion of Catherine Sinclair. Miss Walters's gaze drifted toward the window, where rain pattered against the glass. Catherine, she murmured. Bright girl. Exceptional musical talent. Her rendition of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata could bring tears to the eyes, yet she was accused of theft. A diamond brooch belonging to Miss Thornfield went missing after a school concert, Miss Walters explained. Catherine had been seen near the headmistress's office that evening. When her room was searched, the empty jewel case was found under her mattress. But you had doubts, Poirot suggested softly. The former deputy headmistress's lips tightened. It seemed inconsistent with her character. Catherine had no need to steal. Her family was wealthy, though somewhat unconventional, and she denied it so vehemently. She sighed. But the evidence seemed irrefutable. Miss Thornfield was adamant, more adamant perhaps than the situation warranted, Poirot suggested. Arabella Thornfield was always concerned with the school's reputation, above all else. The scandal needed to be contained quickly. The governors supported her decision. And after the expulsion? I inquired. Miss Walters's expression grew troubled. The girl suffered a complete breakdown. Her mother had died some years earlier. And her father, well, there were rumors about him. A scandal involving misappropriated funds. He couldn't, or wouldn't, stand by her. She was committed to a sanitarium in Switzerland. The Lausanne Sanitarium? Poirot confirmed. Miss Walters looked surprised. Yes. How did you know? Miss Thornfield had arranged to meet with a Dr. Hartley from that institution the day after. Her death, I explained. Indeed? The old lady's eyebrows rose. That is suggestive. Tell me, mademoiselle, what became of Catherine Sinclair? I lost track of her after she was institutionalized. I wrote several times but received no reply. I heard rumors some years later that she had died. A tragic end to a promising life, Poirot murmured. And if I were to tell you, Poirot continued, that a new music teacher has recently joined the staff at St. Cecilia's, a Miss Elena Blackwood, who came from Switzerland? Miss Walters's face paled visibly. That's impossible, unless She shook her head firmly. No, Catherine would be in her 30s now. Miss Blackwood cannot be her. Perhaps not, Poirot conceded. But might she be connected in some way? A friend, perhaps? Or a relative? Miss Walters was silent for a long moment. Catherine had no siblings that I recall, but there was something, a rumor, nothing more, that she might have been in a delicate condition at the time of her expulsion. The implication hung in the air between us. I see, said Poirot softly. Most interesting. We departed shortly. Thereafter, Miss Walters pressing upon Poirot a faded photograph showing her with a group of students from that era. Catherine is the third from the left, she explained. Perhaps it will assist your investigation. In the motor car, Poirot examined the photograph with his pocket magnifying glass. Observe, Hastings, he murmured. The resemblance is striking. Is it not? I looked closely at the girl indicated, a serious-faced young woman with dark hair and a certain intensity in her expression. The likeness to Miss Blackwood was indeed remarkable. Could they be the same person? I wondered. The age would be wrong by some 15 years, Poirot replied. But a daughter, that is another matter entirely. Our return to St. Cecilia's was delayed by a mechanical issue with the motor car, necessitating a stop in a village garage. It was early evening by the time we reached the school grounds. Poirot insisted on returning immediately to his room to refresh himself before dinner. When I entered my own accommodations, I noticed at once that something was amiss. The papers Poirot had entrusted to me, including the newspaper clippings from the chapel, had been disturbed, though nothing appeared to be missing. More significantly, on my pillow lay a folded note on plain white paper. Inside, written in a neat, precise hand, were the words, "Some injustices cry out for remedy." I hurried to Poirot's room to share this discovery, only to find him engaged in an animated telephone conversation. We are certain, he was saying. He glanced up at my entrance, his expression grave. One moment, he said into the receiver before covering the mouthpiece. What is it, Hastings? You look disturbed. I showed him the note. His eyes narrowed as he read it, then returned to the telephone. Inspector? One more question. The death certificate for Catherine Sinclair. You have examined it personally? And the date? Ah, bon. Most illuminating. After replacing the receiver, Poirot turned to me, his expression troubled, yet excited in that peculiar way that always indicated a significant breakthrough. It seems, mon ami, that Catherine Sinclair supposedly died in the Swiss asylum 10 years ago of consumption, according to the records. And yet, I prompted. Poirot held up the death certificate Jap had faxed to the school office earlier that day. His finger tapped a small irregularity in the document, an almost imperceptible discrepancy in the typeset of certain characters. The little gray cells, Hastings. They insist that this document has been altered, most professionally, but altered nonetheless. Chapter 5. The little gray cells at work. The morning following our revelations about Catherine Sinclair's dubious death certificate found Poirot in an animated state. He paced the small sitting room that had been allocated to our use, pausing occasionally to adjust his immaculate mustache in the mirror above the fireplace. We must observe, Hastings, he declared. The time for questions will come, but first we must gather impressions. I have arranged a little gathering this afternoon. Lady Westholme has been most accommodating. A gathering? I inquired. What sort of gathering, mon ami? That most English of institutions. The staff and senior students will attend in the main drawing room. Lady West suggested it might restore a sense of normality to the school routine. And your purpose? I knew my friend well enough to recognize when he had ulterior motives. His eyes twinkled. Observation, Hastings. Always observation. The gathering proved to be a subdued affair. Tea was served by white-gloved maids, while conversation remained, politely anchored to neutral topics. Poirot moved among the assembled company with surprising grace for one of his rounded build, engaging in brief conversations and observing everything with his keen eyes. I positioned myself near the tea service, as instructed, noting how each person prepared their beverage. Most followed conventional English custom, but I noticed Miss Blackwood's method was distinct. She added a slice of lemon, followed by honey, and stirred precisely 3 times before returning the spoon to the saucer. When I reported this to Poirot later, his eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Excellent, Hastings. You have observed something of significance. The late Miss Thornfield prepared her tea in exactly this manner, most unusual and quite foreign to English custom. Yet Miss Blackwood, who claims no prior acquaintance with the headmistress, has adopted the identical habit. Perhaps she observed Miss Thornfield during school meals, I suggested. Peut-être, Poirot allowed. Or perhaps she learned this ritual many years ago, from one who wished to emulate Miss Thornfield in all things. He tapped his fingers against his lips, deep in thought. We must search Miss Blackwood's rooms, Hastings. Discreetly, of course. Surely, Jap could obtain a warrant? No. The official police, they must follow procedures. But we seek only confirmation of a theory, not evidence for court. Come, the dinner hour approaches. The staff will be occupied. I confess I felt uncomfortable as we made our way to the teacher's wing. Poirot, however, showed no such compunction, producing a small set of picklocks with the casual air of one retrieving a handkerchief. A gift from an old friend, he explained, noticing my expression. Most useful in our profession. Miss Blackwood's quarters were modest but neat, reflecting the same orderliness we had observed in her music room. Poirot moved methodically through the space, examining possessions with careful attention. On her bookshelf, alongside volumes of music, stood several botanical texts, focusing particularly on medicinal plants. Interesting reading for a music teacher, I remarked. Indeed, Poirot murmured. He carefully removed one volume entitled Botanical Compounds and Their Properties. Inside, various passages were underlined, including a lengthy section on plant-derived poisons and their effects. In the wardrobe, beneath carefully folded garments, we discovered a small wooden box containing dried plant specimens, each labeled in a neat hand. Poirot examined them with interest but replaced them exactly as found. The most revealing discovery, however, came from the drawer of her writing desk. Hidden beneath correspondence and sheet music lay a small leather-bound journal. Poirot opened it carefully, his expression growing more intent as he perused the contents. Hastings, he said quietly, observe these entries. They detail Miss Blackwood's positions at various educational institutions across Europe over the past decade. But, look here. He indicated a gap in the chronology. For 3 years, there is no employment listed. And these 3 years correspond precisely to the period when, according to Dr. Hartley, Catherine Sinclair was released from the Lausanne sanitarium. Released, I exclaimed. So she didn't die there? The death certificate, as we suspected, was falsified. Catherine Sinclair left the sanitarium, cured according to Dr. Hartley's private records, in 1921. After that, she disappears from official records. And 3 years later, a Miss Elena Blackwood emerges, with excellent recommendations but no verifiable history before that point. We replaced everything exactly as we had found it and departed as silently as we had entered. As we made our way back to our quarters, Poirot's expression remained thoughtful. "There is more to discover, Hastings. I have requested information about Catherine Sinclair's family. If she had a child, as Miss Walters suggested, what became of it? We must learn more." The telegram arrived during dinner, a terse communication, from Inspector Jap Sinclair. "Child confirmed. Stop Swiss asylum. Stop adopted by maternal Aunt Harrison. Stop further details following." Stop Jap Poirot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he tucked the telegram into his pocket. "The pieces, they begin to assemble themselves, do they not?" Later that evening, a memorial service was held in the school's secondary chapel, the main one still being sealed as a crime scene. Miss Blackwood had been requested to play the organ. She performed with technical precision, her expression composed, as she accompanied the school choir through hymns selected to honor the deceased headmistress. I observed her carefully, noting the perfect control she maintained over her features. Only once did her composure falter, when Lady Westholme rose to deliver a eulogy praising Miss Thornfield's unwavering dedication to maintaining the school's standards and reputation. The service concluded with a solemn rendition of "Abide with Me," the same hymn that had been open on the organ when Miss Thornfield was murdered. As the final verses echoed through the chapel, I noticed an elderly man slipping into a seat in the back row. His weathered face and rough hands suggested outdoor work, though he wore a respectable dark suit, somewhat threadbare but neatly pressed. Miss Blackwood's hands faltered on the keys as her gaze met his for an instant. Her composed mask slipped, revealing an expression of such complex emotion that I could not begin to interpret it. Then abruptly, she rose from the organ bench and hurried from the chapel, leaving the final chord hanging unresolved in the air. The elderly man disappeared during the resulting confusion. When I pointed this out to Poirot, his eyes gleamed with excitement. "Quick, Hastings! We must find her." We searched the school buildings without success. Finally, on Poirot's intuition, we tried the music room. There, we found Miss Blackwood, seated at the piano, playing that same haunting lullaby Poirot had recognized earlier. Her face was pale but composed once more. "The gentleman at the service," Poirot began without preamble. "You recognized him, did you not?" Miss Blackwood's fingers stilled on the keys. She looked up at us, her dark eyes unreadable. "Thomas Wilkins," she said quietly. "He was the gardener here when I—" She stopped abruptly, her hands trembling slightly, as they rested on the keyboard. Outside, the wind had risen, rattling the windows of the music room with sudden ferocity. A storm was brewing, both within and without the walls of St. Cecilia's. Chapter 6. The music of Truth Dawn broke with a clarity that belied the emotional tempest within St. Cecilia's. Poirot was already dressed and had completed his morning routine, with characteristic precision when I joined him for breakfast. "We must locate this Thomas Wilkins without delay," he announced, delicately dabbing his lips with a napkin. If he was indeed the gardener during the Sinclair affair, his testimony could prove invaluable. Finding Wilkins proved less challenging than anticipated. The local village postmistress, delighted by Poirot's continental charm, readily divulged that the former gardener lived in a cottage on the edge of the village commons. The dwelling was humble but meticulously maintained, with a garden that displayed the hand of an experienced horticulturist. Wilkins himself answered our knock, a weathered man in his 70s, straight-backed despite his years, with calloused hands and observant eyes. I wondered when you'd come, he said simply, stepping aside to admit us. Saw you with the police, at the school. Figured it wouldn't be long. The interior of the cottage reflected its owner's character. Plain, orderly, without pretension. Framed botanical illustrations adorned the walls, and a collection of gardening implements hung in precise arrangement beside the hearth. You attended the memorial service yesterday, Poirot began. Wilkins nodded. Wanted to see her for myself. The resemblance is unmistakable. Her? Poirot raised an eyebrow. Miss Blackwood, though that's not her name, is it? She's Catherine's girl. Has her mother's hands, a pianist's hands. Knew it the moment I saw her at the organ. Poirot's eyes gleamed. You knew Catherine Sinclair well? Tended the gardens at St. Cecilia's for 32 years, Wilkins replied. Watched generations of girls come and go. Catherine was special, kind to everyone regardless of station. Would sit on the garden bench and play her portable chess set with me during her free periods. Brilliant mind, that one. And the incident that led to her expulsion, I prompted. Wilkins's face darkened. A travesty. She never took that brooch. You seem certain, Poirot observed. I know what I saw. The old gardener leaned forward. That evening. After the concert, I was trimming the ivy outside Miss Thornfield's office. The window was open. Warm night it was. I saw Miss Thornfield remove that diamond brooch herself and place it in her desk drawer. Later, claimed it was stolen from her dressing table. Did you report this? I asked. Who'd believe a gardener over the headmistress? Besides, by the time I learned Catherine had been accused, the jewel case had already been found in her room. His gnarled hands clenched. Convenient, that. Too convenient. Why would Miss Thornfield do such a thing? Poirot inquired. Wilkins hesitated, then reached for a tin box on the mantelpiece. From it, he withdrew a yellowed newspaper clipping. 3 months before Catherine's expulsion. This appeared in the financial pages. Small item. Easily overlooked unless you knew what to look for. The article detailed the collapse of an investment scheme. Among the directors named was Harold Sinclair, Catherine's father. Miss Thornfield had invested heavily in Sinclair's company, Wilkins explained. Lost a small fortune when it failed. Revenge and recuperation, I murmured. That's what I figured. The school governors paid her handsomely to handle the scandal discreetly. And Mrs. Danvers? Poirot asked. The school secretary. Thornfield's creature through and through, Wilkins confirmed. Helped orchestrate the whole affair. Probably the one who planted the jewel case. As we departed, Poirot turned back. One final question, Mr. Wilkins. The child, Catherine's child, you knew of its existence? The old gardener's expression softened. She wrote to me once from the asylum, said they'd taken her baby away, given it to her mother's sister. Begged me to find out if the child was well. I tried, but the family had moved abroad. Lost track of them after that. Upon our return to St. Cecilia's, we found Inspector Japp had arrived with additional information. Records confirm Catherine Sinclair was released from Lausanne Sanitarium in 1921, he reported in the privacy of our quarters. The death certificate was indeed falsified, common practice in those days for patients with certain diagnoses. Spared the family embarrassment. And the child? Poirot inquired. A daughter born in 1927, Japp confirmed. Adopted by Catherine's aunt, Margaret Harrison. They lived in Switzerland until the aunt's death 10 years ago. Approximately when Miss Elena Blackwood began her teaching career, Poirot noted. I've traced her employment history, Always respectable girls' schools, moving every few years, never staying long enough to form attachments. Working her way towards St. Cecilia's, I'd wager. To confront Miss Thornfield, I suggested, or to exact revenge, Japp added grimly. Poirot's expression remained contemplative. Perhaps. Yet something troubles me about this scenario. Mes amis, the psychology. It is not quite right. Before he could elaborate, Lady Westholme entered, her aristocratic features arranged in an expression of concern. Monsieur Poirot, I understand you've been making inquiries about Catherine Sinclair. I must insist on knowing the relevance to poor Arabella's murder. All in good time, Lady Westholme, Poirot replied smoothly. Tell me, you were on the Board of Governors during the Sinclair affair, were you not? I was, though I took little part in the proceedings. Miss Thornfield handled the matter with her usual efficiency. And you approved her methods? Lady Westholme's expression hardened slightly. St. Cecilia's reputation is paramount. Arabella understood that better than anyone. After she had departed, Poirot suggested we speak with Miss Blackwood directly. We found her in the music room, composing what appeared to be a letter. Miss Blackwood, Poirot began without preamble. Or should I say, Miss Sinclair? Her dark eyes met his steadily. Elena Blackwood is my legal name, but not your birth name. Poirot pressed gently. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. Elena Sinclair Harrison was my birth name. Catherine Sinclair was my mother. Who sent you here? I asked. No one sent me, Captain Hastings. I came of my own accord. After my aunt's death, I discovered my mother's diaries among her possessions. They detailed what had happened at St. Cecilia's, the false accusation, the expulsion, her subsequent breakdown. And you sought justice? Poirot suggested. I sought truth, she corrected. My mother spent years in that asylum. Her life was stolen from her. And for what? A lie. Her fingers brushed the piano keys, producing a dissonant chord. Some injustices cry out for remedy, she whispered. And in that moment, the music of truth began to play. Reputation destroyed. Her child taken from her. I needed to understand why. By becoming a teacher at the very institution that ruined her. By facing the woman responsible, she replied simply, I had no intention of harming Miss Thornfield. I merely wanted her to acknowledge what she had done. Perhaps even clear my mother's name. Yet she was murdered. Inspector interjected from the doorway, having followed us. Poisoned with a substance you have books about in your possession. I didn't kill her, Miss Blackwood insisted. Yes, I confronted her privately. She recognized me almost immediately, said I had my mother's eyes. She seemed troubled by my presence, but not frightened. She spoke of making amends and setting the record straight. A convenient claim when the other party cannot contradict it, Inspector observed. It's the truth, Inspector. Whatever else I might be, I am not a murderer. Poirot's expression remained unreadable. We shall see, mademoiselle. That evening, a maid discovered Mrs. Danvers's body in the school archives room. She had been poisoned in the same manner as Miss Thornfield, a Bible verse pinned to her. Clothing. The sins of the father shall be visited upon the children. Inspector immediately ordered Miss Blackwood's arrest, despite Poirot's evident reservations. 2 murders by the same method, Inspector insisted. Both victims implicated in her mother's disgrace. The evidence is overwhelming. As Miss Blackwood was escorted from the school, her face pale but composed, she turned to Poirot. There is sheet music in Miss Thornfield's desk, she said urgently. The Beethoven variations. Look at what she wrote in the margins. Later examining the music in question, we discovered faint pencil notations that, when read in sequence, formed a message. Harrison Child must reveal truth. Danger from... The final word had been erased. Chapter 7. The Instrument of Justice. "It is too convenient, Hastings," Poirot declared, pacing our sitting room with uncharacteristic agitation. The morning light filtering through the curtains cast long shadows across the carpet. "Miss Blackwood." "As the murderer? It arranges itself too neatly." Inspector, seated in an armchair with a cup of cooling tea before him, appeared less troubled by her recent arrest. "The evidence is substantial, Poirot. 2 murders, identical method. Both victims directly involved in her mother's disgrace. Botanical texts on poisons in her possession. The very poison used found among her things." "Found too easily," Poirot murmured. "Consider, my friend, if you planned such murders, would you retain the poison in literature that might incriminate?" "You? People make mistakes," Inspector countered, "even calculating murderers. I had been examining the sheet music retrieved from Miss Thornfield's desk, the Beethoven variations with their cryptic marginal notes. What do you make of this warning, Poirot? Danger from... and then nothing. Not nothing, mon ami. Observe. The erasure. Someone deliberately removed the name Miss Thornfield had written." Jap leaned forward to examine the paper. "Could have been Miss Blackwood herself. Erased her own name after committing the murder, perhaps?" Poirot allowed the possibility but pressed further. "Yet consider the chronology. According to Miss Blackwood, Miss Thornfield was contemplating making amends and setting the record straight. Yet she was murdered before she could do so. Why would Miss Blackwood kill her just as she was about to clear Catherine Sinclair's name?" "Revenge," Inspector suggested promptly. "Waited 15 years for it, didn't she?" "The psychology, it is still not right," Poirot insisted. "And these murders, they require planning, precision, yet they leave evidence so obvious that even the most inexperienced detective could follow it." He turned suddenly to Inspector. "The poison, you have identified it precisely?" "Lab confirms it's derived from a rare plant extract. Acts similarly to cyanide but leaves distinctive markers. Difficult to obtain unless one has botanical knowledge or connections to someone who does," Poirot mused. Later that morning, we interviewed Dr. Hartley from the Lausanne Sanitarium, who had finally arrived from London, a thin, scholarly man with wire-rimmed spectacles. He brought with him Catherine Sinclair's medical records. Miss Sinclair was admitted in a state of severe melancholia, he explained. The stigma of the theft accusation, compounded by her pregnancy, had triggered a complete nervous collapse. "Yet, you eventually discharged her as cured?" Poirot inquired. "After 3 years of treatment, yes. She made a remarkable recovery, particularly after the birth of her daughter. The child remained with her until she was 2 years old, at which point Miss Sinclair's aunt took custody. It was a mutual arrangement. Catherine recognized she needed time to establish herself independently." "And did she?" Dr. Hartley nodded. "She worked in the sanitarium's administrative office for several years. Quiet, efficient, kept to herself. Then she disappeared." "The death certificate was falsified?" "At her aunt's request. Not uncommon practice for families wishing to avoid the stigma of mental illness." "So Catherine Sinclair could still be alive?" I suggested. The doctor's expression grew troubled. "Technically, yes, though I've had no contact with her since 1921. Poirot's next line of inquiry took us to the school laboratory, where he examined the poison evidence with minute attention. The small glass vial found among Miss Blackwood's possessions contained traces of a clear liquid, labeled in her handwriting as Specimen A. "Most interesting," Poirot murmured, sniffing cautiously. "No almond scent, yet the effects mimic cyanide. The murderer could have easily disguised it in tea," I suggested, recalling the spilled cup beside Miss Thornfield's body. "Indeed. Yet consider, Hastings, the tea itself had the bitter almond scent. Most curious, is it not?" He turned his attention to the laboratory records, noting that certain chemicals had been requisitioned over the past month, not by Miss Blackwood. The signatures are those of Miss Porter, the science mistress, and Lady West, who apparently maintains oversight of all unusual supply requests. That afternoon, Poirot requested a private meeting with Lady West. I accompanied him to her quarters, an elegantly appointed set of rooms befitting the school's primary benefactor. "I fear you make little progress in resolving this dreadful business," she remarked as we were seated. "The governors are most concerned about the school's reputation." "Always the reputation," Poirot noted dryly. "It seems St. Cecilia's values its standing above all else, even justice." Lady Westholme's aristocratic features hardened slightly. "A school such as this cannot survive scandal, Monsieur Poirot. Miss Thornfield understood that principle perfectly, as did you when you supported Catherine Sinclair's expulsion 15 years ago. That was an entirely different matter, was it? You were aware of Miss Thornfield's financial losses in Harold Sinclair's company, were you not?" A flicker of unease crossed Lady Westholme's face. "I fail to see the relevance." "The relevance, madame, is motive. Miss Thornfield sought revenge against Catherine for her father's financial misdeeds, a revenge you facilitated as a member of the board." "Those are serious allegations, Monsieur Poirot." "Facts, madame, not allegations. And now history repeats itself, but this time it is Miss Thornfield who pays the price." Lady Westholme rose abruptly. "I believe our interview is concluded. You forget yourself, sir." As we departed, Poirot appeared oddly satisfied with the encounter. "Observe how she manages her hands, Hastings. Did you notice?" "Can't say I did. The left one remains always partially concealed. Most curious." Our next stop was the library, where we found sheet music with coded messages in Miss Thornfield's handwriting, musical notations that, when interpreted using a system Poirot deduced, revealed the headmistress had indeed recognized Elena's identity and had been contemplating a confession. "She knew the truth would emerge," Poirot explained as we examined the documents. "Miss Blackwood's arrival forced a confrontation with her past sins. And yet, what if Miss Blackwood is innocent, as she claims? Who benefits most from these murders? Who feared what Miss Thornfield might reveal? Consider, Hastings. Both victims knew the truth about Catherine Sinclair's expulsion." That evening, Poirot announced to Inspector that he had solved the case and would reveal all the following night. While Inspector remained skeptical, arrangements were made for a gathering in the school library at 8 about all the principal parties will attend, Poirot instructed, including Miss Blackwood, who must be brought from custody for the occasion. I retired early that night, my head spinning with the complexities of the case. Poirot remained in our sitting room, arranging and rearranging notes in that precise manner that indicated his little gray cells were fully engaged. It must have been shortly after midnight when a tremendous crash awakened me. I leapt from bed, to find that the heavy crystal chandelier in Poirot's room had plummeted onto his bed, smashing it to splinters. By some miracle of timing, Poirot himself had risen moments before to retrieve his reading glasses from the dresser. "It seems, mon ami," he remarked with remarkable composure as we surveyed the destruction, "that someone is most anxious to prevent tomorrow's revelations." The chandelier's supporting chain had been deliberately weakened, a fact confirmed by Japp's early morning inspection. Had Poirot remained in bed, he would certainly have been killed instantly. Chapter 8. The Final Movement. The library of St. Cecilia's had been arranged for Poirot's denouement with meticulous care. Heavy curtains were drawn against the gathering dusk, and lamplight cast a warm glow over the assembled company. Inspector A. Inspector sat to one side, notebook ready, his expression skeptical yet expectant. Miss Blackwood, brought from custody, was pale but composed, her hands folded quietly in her lap. Thomas Wilkins, the former gardener, had been summoned at Poirot's insistence and sat uncomfortably on the edge of his chair. Lady West occupied a position of prominence near the fireplace, her aristocratic features arranged in an expression of polite interest. Several staff members completed the gathering, including Miss Porter, the science mistress. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his diminutive figure somehow commanding the room's attention. I noticed he had taken unusual care with his appearance this evening, his mustache impeccably waxed, his bow tie precisely aligned, his patent leather shoes gleaming in the lamplight. "Mesdames, Messieurs," he began, "I thank you for your attendance this evening. We are here to discuss the murders of Miss Arabella Thornfield and Mrs. Danvers, crimes linked by method, motive, and a message." He paced slowly before his audience. "When I was invited to St. Cecilia's by Lady West, it was ostensibly to deliver a lecture. Instead, I found myself confronted with a tragedy born of events 15 years in the past." Poirot recounted the Sinclair affair, the false accusation, the expulsion, Catherine's subsequent breakdown and institutionalization. "The apparent facts arranged themselves into a neat pattern of revenge," he continued. "Catherine Sinclair's daughter returns to the scene of her mother's disgrace and murders those responsible." Miss Blackwood tensed visibly but remained silent. "It was indeed what the murderer wished us to believe," Poirot said, his eyes sweeping the room. "The evidence against Miss Blackwood accumulated with a rapidity that aroused my suspicions. The poison books in her possession, the botanical specimens, even the murder weapon itself, all discovered with remarkable ease." "Are you suggesting the evidence was planted?" Inspector interrupted. "Precisely, Inspector. Consider, Miss Blackwood is a woman of intelligence. If she planned these murders, would she retain such incriminating evidence? Would she execute her revenge in a manner that pointed so directly to herself? The psychology, it is all wrong." Poirot turned to Miss Blackwood. "You came to St. Cecilia's not for revenge, but for truth. When you confronted Miss Thornfield, she recognized you immediately." "Yes," Miss Blackwood replied quietly. "She said she had been expecting me for years, that my mother's face had haunted her dreams. And she spoke of making amends. She said it wasn't too late to set things right. She had scheduled a meeting with the Board of Governors." Her gaze flickered toward Lady West. "She planned to clear my mother's name, which presented a problem for the true murderer," Poirot continued. "If Miss Thornfield confessed that Catherine Sinclair had been falsely accused, questions would naturally arise. Why was she framed? Who benefited from her disgrace? What financial arrangements were made to contain the scandal?" Lady Westholm shifted slightly in her chair. "This is pure speculation, Monsieur Poirot." "Not speculation, madame. Fact. Miss Thornfield left evidence, a coded message in her sheet music. She identified the person she feared, the person who stood to lose everything if the truth emerged." Poirot approached Lady West. You were more than a benefactor to St. Cecilia's, were you not? You were complicit in the false accusation against Catherine Sinclair. You helped cover up Miss Thornfield's embezzlement of school funds, money she lost in Harold Sinclair's investment scheme. This is outrageous, Lady Westholme protested, though I noticed her left hand remained concealed in the folds of her dress. Is it? Poirot withdrew several papers from his pocket. These financial records show substantial payments from school accounts to both you and Miss Thornfield during the period following Catherine Sinclair's expulsion. Payments authorized by the board under the pretext of special administrative services. Inspector leaned forward with sudden interest. What precisely are you suggesting, Poirot? Catherine Sinclair was sacrificed to protect the reputations of Miss Thornfield and Lady West. The missing brooch was merely a pretext. The real crime was financial malfeasance on a significant scale. Funds diverted from the school's endowment. To cover personal losses, Poirot turned back to Lady West. When Miss Blackwood arrived at St. Cecilia's, Miss Thornfield recognized her immediately. The resemblance to Catherine was unmistakable. Her conscience, dormant for 15 years, finally awoke. She decided to confess, which you could not. Allow, I added, understanding dawning. The poison used in both murders is most distinctive, a compound derived from a rare plant found in the East Indies, where Lord Westholme served as colonial governor. The chemical analysis shows it was combined with a substance that produces the scent of bitter almonds when heated, a deliberate attempt to suggest cyanide poisoning. Lady West rose abruptly. This is absurd. You have no proof. On the contrary. Madam, the handwriting on the Bible verses matches samples of your own, despite attempts at disguise. The distinctive chemical compound was requisitioned by you personally for the science department, and there is the matter of your injured left hand, burned, I believe, when preparing the poison solution. For a moment, the library was utterly silent. Then, with a movement startling in its swiftness, Lady Westholme reached into her handbag. "Look out!" Inspector shouted, lunging forward. But Poirot remained calm. "The pistol, madame?" I took the liberty of having it removed this afternoon and replacing the bullets with blanks. One cannot be too careful after an attempt on one's life. Lady Westholme's aristocratic composure crumbled. She was going to ruin everything. She hissed. 30 years I've dedicated to this institution. My name, my family's standing, all tied to St. Cecilia's reputation. Thornfield promised she would never speak of our arrangement. Then this girl appears, and suddenly Arabella develops a conscience. And Mrs. Danvers, she knew too much. Always did. Started making demands after Thornfield's death. Thought she could blackmail me, as if I hadn't paid enough already to protect this school's precious reputation. As Lady Westholme was led away, Miss Blackwood approached Poirot. "How can I ever thank you? You've cleared not only my name, but my mother's, as well." "Justice, mademoiselle, is its own reward," he replied gently. "Your mother's reputation will be restored, and perhaps, in time, the wounds of the past may heal." Later that evening, we attended a small gathering in the music room. Miss Blackwood, now formally exonerated, played her mother's favorite lullaby on the piano, the same haunting melody Poirot had recognized days earlier. "How did you know Lady West was the murderer?" I asked as we prepared to depart St. Cecilia's the following morning. Poirot smiled, adjusting his hat to a precise angle. The little gray cells, they always spoke of harmony and order. When Miss Thornfield prepared her tea, she used lemon and honey in a specific sequence, a habit Miss Blackwood shared, having learned it from her mother, who in turn adopted it from Miss Thornfield in her student days. A small detail, but revealing, he gazed thoughtfully at the school's Gothic facade. In the end, mon ami, the music of truth cannot be silenced. It plays on, waiting for those with ears to hear its melody. The morning sun broke through the clouds as we departed, casting long shadows behind us, but illuminating the road ahead with golden clarity. Thanks for joining us for today's mystery. Were you surprised when Lady Westholme was revealed as the true murderer? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed watching Poirot's little gray cells at work, don't forget to hit subscribe for more mysteries daily. And if you're craving more of Agatha Christie's brilliant detective, let me know which of his cases you'd like to hear next. Until next time, remember Poirot's wisdom. The music of truth cannot be silenced. It plays on, waiting for those with ears to hear its melody. This is Alie, signing off from Café Tales.